Hey patrons, thank you so much for all of the continued support. It's very much appreciated. And I am done. Okay, so I just finished up reading The Tyranny of Faith. This is book 2 of Empire of the Wolf by Richard Swan, and I want to give you my unedited thoughts upon finishing this book, which was just right now. So this book is incredible. This is definitely going to go down as a top 10 read of the year for me, because as it stands, this is solidly in the top 5, and we don't have a ton of months left before the end of the year. I loved the first book of this in every way, but I honestly thought that this one was superior in also every way. It's so perfect to me as a follow-up to what I viewed as a really, really good book, and it made itself different. It didn't just try to do the same thing. We went in new directions, the directions that I felt like we were gonna go, but they ended up getting delivered on, and I'm just really, really happy about it. So yeah, this is gonna end up being a very gushing review, because I honestly can't think of a single thing that I didn't absolutely love from what Richard Swan wrote here for me in this wonderful book. So, the story. The story picks off right where the last book left off. And I don't think I'm really spoiling anything by saying that the first book is like a really isolated story. And it's at its heart, it's this mystery novel. And I mentioned it before, and I feel like I'm a very contradictory person, but I have, complex views. But in general, I don't love mystery stories. They've never really worked in a really good way for me. But apparently I do sometimes when I just fall in love with the writing, because I just loved the first one. It started out as what it felt like the promise was going to be of the book, was to solve an isolated mystery. But as happens in a lot of fantasy novels, the plot expands, it becomes about a much bigger thing than you originally thought. And the story does a thing that I'm not used to in fantasy, where it took a really dark turn. I mean, this book started rather light in nature. It wasn't, incredibly light. I mean, we have this, I forget the name of like what he is, but he's like this traveling judge, and he goes around kind of like what happened in kind of like early American history, maybe in other countries too, but there wasn't just like a set court. Judges would go around hearing cases, and when a village would have a crime happen, it might be a little while till they're able to get to the bottom of it. And now, what makes this a fantasy story, other than the fact that it's completely made up, and so inherently it's fantasy, but the judge that goes around has some like magical powers that make him like a superpowered judge. One of the things is he can kind of like speak with the dead, in kind of like a dark way. He can also force people that don't have equal powers from him to tell him the truth. In most cases, and some other things kind of like that. So he's like this super judge. And yeah, it tells a story. It gets really dark. I love when stories kind of like blindside you like that. I've read several books recently that have kind of done that, and I love that direction. But by the time that original book finishes, the promise to the reader is that we're going to get this larger scope going on for the rest of the series, which is exactly where this book takes it. Because, I did love the first one, but I was wanting more. Even though I loved it, it was a very good 5-star book. I wanted this world to get bigger. I wanted to solve, I love epic fantasy. And when I see this isolated plot going on, and I also see these major things happening on in the background with the kingdom, I'm like, yeah, but go there, go solve that. There's bigger things going on here, people. And to find out that we actually do get to do those bigger things. And the first book was essentially a big prelude for the real story going on. That's just great stuff to me. And that's where I really want my fantasy stories to go. So I can't say too much more about the plot here without ruining anything. Because ultimately, I really want you to read this book. And I do want you to be kind of surprised about where this goes. So let's move on from the plot. Let's talk a little bit about the world building. I love it. It's great, and of course I love it. I told you I loved everything about this already, so what am I really spoiling here? But I feel like a broken record here on this channel, but to tell you what I love about my world building. But good world building to me makes me feel lost in the world, where I can't stop thinking about it. A good world building includes oftentimes either a wonderful map that sucks me in, or such good explanations about where we are that I can kind of like visualize this world. In this case, it's both. I mean, the map is beautiful. It's huge. It's way bigger than the story is ever going to be, which I love. That's like real life. And yeah, it does feel kind of like this medieval, like most fantasy stories, I feel like a medieval kind of England setting. There's not a ton of differences between the different areas other than you have rural and then you have city. In the first book, all we're really dealing with is that rural type of setting, and we have kind of like a smaller, kind of like a town. But in this one, we get to go to the big city. And yeah, it's great. I'm enraptured in it, and I want to live in this world for longer and longer. And ultimately, I'm kind of sad that this is going to be a trilogy, because I feel like this could be a really, really, really long story. And I like long stories, especially when I'm loving the material. The fantasy elements here, I talked a little bit about it, but they really all center around the powers that these judges have. But in this one, it gets much bigger, because we have this antagonist, by far the main antagonist of the story, and we're told in this way that we're having these, it's called a framing narrative, where you have this main character, and the main character is not this judge, which I love. The main character is like the apprentice to the judge, this young woman who's trying to learn the skills of the trade. And so seeing it from her eyes is great. But you have... you're told right at the beginning that this guy, like within the first like chapter or two, I feel like in the first book, that this guy that was traveling with them is going to end up being the antagonist of this story, because we're being told it all feels like you're in it, but there's these moments where they say, yeah, and I wish we would have stopped this guy when we could have. That it just kind of tells you all you need to know about who the antagonist is going to be. But the antagonist of the story ends up illegally getting his hand on these powers that the judges have, and starts to build up this religious element and to try to take over the empire that this judge works for. So the magical elements are amplified greatly in this one, because now you don't just have it with the judges. Now you have others that are learning it at a much faster pace and are using them not for good, not to solve crimes, but to wreak havoc on the empire. Not only that, but and I don't want to ruin anything, I'm not going to say it, but we start dealing with like kind of these more demon aspects of things as the magic powers start getting kind of like out of hand. It's great. It's great. It makes this way more of a fantasy story than you have any idea that it's going to be. Because in the first one, it feels like kind of like a historical fiction book with some arguably, heavy fantasy elements in it. But it's not used very often. The fantasy elements in the first story are used a small handful of times, but the rest feels like you're reading a Sherlock Holmes-y type of story. But yeah, love the direction that the fantasy elements went in this. The characters, we're dealing with the same essential set of characters. We have a couple new ones brought in that aren't, anything to really write home about. But I love the main characters, especially the little, trio of people that we get or that are in this main band that are trying to solve this problem. I love the main judge. I love the main character, and I love this actually it's four. There's four main people in the story, because there's these two other guys that are going along with them. They all feel unique. They're wonderfully written. They feel like real people that have their own problems. They're not perfect. They're very, very far from perfect. They're not like this evil, though. And in fact, they don't even feel like, these Abercrombie, everybody's kind of gray. They feel like they have flaws. But that's also like real life. And in some of the cases, very serious flaws. But in general, they're trying to do the right thing. But I love the characters. The character writing here is maybe the best part of this story. Backing up a little bit, though, going back to the essential plot here, because I need to tell you another thing that I love about this is, when's the last time that you read a fantasy story that involved, court and law and judges and lawyers and, nothing takes place in a courtroom because it's this traveling kind of circuit thing, but it's awesome. You get this kind of like, I'm a video game guy, but you get this kind of like, Ace Attorney kind of feel to it. It's awesome. I love it. And the fact that the author here is a lawyer makes it feel like the guy's writing his passion, that he really knows what he's talking about. And it really shows up, especially when it comes to the characters. The prose, equally great. I love it. Now, it's not going to be this flowery purple prose, but it's also not simple. It's also not this basic stuff that you're going to see in most fantasy stories. It definitely feels way above average. And yeah, I wish I would have saved some quotes here that I could read that will really exemplify it. But I think in general that people are going to enjoy the prose here. In terms of enjoyability, it's what's not to like? Now, obviously some people don't like it. I do notice that on Goodreads that the score is dramatically higher for the second book than the first book, which I love to see. And I love to see it in part because I always love to see stories, improve on the viewer's perspective. Now, I get that Goodreads is not, a great symbol for what to believe out there. But I do find that you want the stories to improve in scores, mostly because the people that don't like the first book are not going to read it anymore. So you would expect the scores to go up. So when you see a score go down, that's a really, really bad sign. In general, I've never seen a score, take a reverse trend in me disagreeing with that. It's always like, oh man, I hate to see that. Not here. It's very much higher, and I find it to be really good. I know, obviously, some people don't like this. I noticed some friends of mine in the booktubing community, didn't love some aspects of this. I don't know what I'm missing that they found, but I'm glad I didn't find it because it's just awesome. So who will enjoy this book? I think if you love a mystery story or even like a mystery story, this is awesome. If you like religious elements in your stories, this isn't like a Christian theme or anything, that's... Although it does, I'm not like a very religious guy, and I'm going to expose that real quick by telling you that, I didn't feel like that to me. Maybe it is, but it's awesome. I find that religion can be really botched in fantasy stories, but when they're done really well, it's such a wonderful element that gets brought in. But if you like the more religious elements to things getting brought into books that aren't like, this is good or this is bad, but just as a theme in the story, yeah, awesome stuff. If you like good writing, this is an awesome story. This is great. I think this book came out this year. I don't know why it took me a little while to get to it. It just wasn't on my radar. It should have been. It should be on yours too. Go check out this book. It's awesome. Check out the series. I think the next one, the final one in the series, comes out next year. And then I will be doing everything I can to be following Richard Swan and his writing career, because he is one of my favorites, and I have full faith the final book's going to be wonderful, and anything he puts out after that, if he chooses to do so, will be very well done. So that's wrapping it up for me. Thank you so much for watching this review, and as always, happy reading to you. Thanks again to all of my patrons, with a special shout out to my Ascendant tier and Librarian tier patrons: Anna G, Brian, CJ, Darren, Gregory, Jonathan, My Book is Lit, Miranda's Bookshelf, Nathan T, Nev's Book Channel, Ron Reich, Russell, Ryan L, Sydney Baker, Tahir, Anna, Andra, Angelo, Ben, Blair, Brock, Evan, Harry B, Jamie, Joe, Maria, Michael Sugarman, Sky, TW57, Wacky, and Zion.